For what has been a cautious and fairly reserved final practice session leading up to tomorrow's Coca-Cola 800, Australia's richest and longest endurance race for motorbikes. And this wet weather has had a great effect on final preparations leading up to tomorrow's race, because teams haven't had enough practice time for selection of tyres and deciding race strategy, and of course some of the leading contenders for the race don't go near as well in the wet weather, whereas others who weren't so favoured do go just that little bit better. In fact, it's been a dramatic week leading up to this race as far as motor racing news is concerned, with the retirement of some of the leading riders, ill feeling between teams because of last year's Castrol 6 Hour, and of course the switching of bikes and riders for the event. But to look at more of the contenders for tomorrow's race and the likely outcome, let's have a look at some of those leading riders in action at the final practice session. And bike number one is the prototype Maruwaki Kawasaki Formula 1 bike from Japan. The riders are Johnson and Gardner, and in a dry commentary box, Will Hagen.
Mr. Webfoot himself is riding number one. Wayne Gardner, the man who put in such a spectacular performance in the last Castrol 6 Hour in the rain, back with the co-rider that had his bike, the Honda 1100R, prepared by Peter Malloy, declared the winner at the end of the race, but on a recount and a hearing, and several hearings in fact, and protests, just a couple of weeks ago was declared to be second placed rather than first. But here he is, just 21 years old, headed for Daytona Motor Raceway next weekend. Several international rides in the offing for this highly talented youngster from Wollongong. He's just feeling the bike and the circuit out at the moment. The bike is a Maruwaki prepared Kawasaki Formula 1 bike. It's sponsored by Mentor and by Maruwaki in Japan. And it is probably the most potent machine in the race, ridden by the most potent team, no matter what the weather conditions. Some of them may be equally as favoured in the dry, such as Dennis Neal, Michael Cole, but in the rain, this team should be mercurial. There's been all sorts of changes of riders for them. Originally, in fact, Gardner declined to ride in this race, where he was to be teamed with John Pace. But then, because of his Daytona contracts, he decided he'd better make sure everything was right, get there on time, feeling fresh, and keep out of trouble perhaps this weekend. But Pace has had a problem in his family. He's withdrawn from the bike, and now Gardner's come in to join Andrew Johnson, the Victorian, the Australian Unlimited champion for this year.
Thought to be a last-minute starter on the Maruwaki Kawasaki. Andrew Johnson, you must be pleased with the ride.
Yes, I'm very pleased, John. I'm very fortunate to get the ride with Maruwaki. There was a bit of upset there. Wayne's going overseas to ride the factory bikes, but he was tied down to that contract, and I got in place with John Pace to ride in this 8-hour race, 800.
But in fact, John Pace is no longer on the bike. He's had a small family drama today, and Wayne Gardner is back on the bike, so the Castrol 6 Hour teaming is back together again. How do you feel about being on the bike, Wayne?
I haven't ridden it yet. I think it should be really good. I think two of us proved at the 6 Hour that we won, and I think we'll do it again, I hope.
As a prototype, of course, it's much lighter than the superbikes and the production machines. Just what are the riding characteristics of the machine?
Well, it's very similar it's halfway between a superbike and a TZ750. It's very light, it stops excellent. The performance of the machine is quite astounding. I'm very pleased with it. It's in fact the best handling four-stroke I've ever ridden in my lifetime.
Does it have the outright power of the big Syndicate Kawasaki that you've been riding in the last year?
Initially out of the corners, I wouldn't say it had the same power as the Syndicate, but down the straights and in a long run, yeah, it'd be identical, if not a little bit faster because of the weight ratio.
CR 860cc from Queensland, running in the prototype class, was the bike that led the race last year in an outstanding wet weather performance by Wayne Gardner. He was sharing the bike with Dave Robbins, who's on it again this year, but his co-rider will be Peter Byers, the man who came down from Queensland, had never seen Oran Park before, and was in the top 10 qualifiers on a new Honda 1100 for the last Castrol 6 Hour. Under conditions such as we've got here now, this bike could be really good. It has renowned handling and braking. It's got very good road holding, nice torque, makes it easy for the riders, and two good competent riders on it. ran into mechanical problems last year, and in fact none of the prototype bikes, potentially the fastest bikes in the race, came into good placings. They were well down when the results finally came out, although they were prominent in the race early on. The first problem to befall this one last year was wet ignition. But Wayne Gardner switched from that to another bike, and there it is, nicely on line down the bottom of the straight in what is a very quick corner, and takes a lot of precision and commitment to get it right at the speeds they come through there. A fourth gear corner under these conditions. Coming up there onto number 9, Bill McCulloch, Phil O'Brien on a Suzuki 1100, running as a superbike. The yellow-coloured number plate, racing number plate, indicates that it's running in the prototype class.
Well, Dave, it's good to see you back down competing again here in New South Wales, and you're on the Ducati. Tell us a little bit about the prototype.
Well, it's 860cc's and a V-twin, Italian motorbike. We were here last year. The motor ran really well, but we had a lot of other problems. This year, we tried to eradicate the other problems.
And your co-rider, you're confident about making a fair go of it, the 800 kilometres?
Yes, Peter's been going very well in Queensland racing. He hasn't been down here, but he's been going very well in practice.
And yourself, what's on the agenda for you other than the major races this year?
A bit of golf and semi-professional soccer.
On number 6, superbike, Suzuki 1100, is Neil Chivers and Jim Budd. Budd, as you can see, presently riding the bike. Chivers was one of the prominent teams in the last Castrol 6R, and in fact only a couple of weeks ago that team, after being declared second at the end of the race, was finally, on a lap recount and several protests and hearings, declared winners of the last Castrol 6R. The team of Chivers and Pace ousting the Wayne Gardner, Andrew Johnson team. Budd, as you can see, is tentative on that bike, more so I think than Chivers will be. Former Team Kawasaki rider, but Kawasaki has dropped their commitment to road racing in Australia to concentrate on both motocross in this country and also on Greg Hansford's challenge for the World Championship in the 500cc class. So Budd's now a free agent, and he's joined up with Neil Chivers. There's been quite a few changes in this team, as with some of the other Suzuki involved bikes. And one of them was that Alan Hales, originally scheduled to share the bike with Jim Budd, is alleged to have declared his retirement from motorcycle racing. The 32-year-old Sydney rider who won the 6R in 1979 was chasing the lead last year, 1980, when he fell, and was in the lead the former year, 1978, when he also fell, has decided apparently to retire and has withdrawn from this race. The bike, actually, although it's running in the superbike class, is at the moment a stock standard bike, but doesn't have the option of changing to the production class. So it has to race against hotter bikes, but with less power.
Drama for Jim Budd and Neil Chivers. You were entered to ride a Suzuki superbike. What's happened?
Well, due to lack of time, we haven't had time to develop the bike fully, so we've decided to go back to a production bike.
Just how bad was the superbike that you tried to ride here?
Well, the motor wasn't running. We've got no idea of the tyres, the wheels we need. The exhausts are wrong. There's just too many things to do at once, and we just haven't got the time to do it.
Well, the production bike has got 700 kilometres on it. It's straight out of a crate. It hasn't had its first service yet.
Well, we're just going to run it in fast and see how good these Suzukis are. I'm quite sure it'll stand quite well, especially if it rains.
Jim, however, you can't enter in the production bike class because you're in the superbike class, so what do you do there?
All we can do is aim for outright, hope it rains, and just try to take off the whole thing outright. If we're a superbike and we've got a production bike, that's our loss.
How can you spend 3 months in the hot Australian summer allegedly preparing for a meeting like this and yet be so ill-prepared?
I wish I could answer.
Pretty, the South Australian and former Australian champion, shares the bike with Gary Coleman. It's Pretty in the saddle at the moment, and he is a very determined, very skilled rider indeed. Yamaha 1100 from Pitman's Yamaha, the traditional sponsor of the talented South Australian who went to Europe last year but had a sad time. Lack of budget and a fall which dislocated a collarbone and finally saw him have an operation late last year around August, September. Saw him have a fairly miserable year. Have a look at the left side. See the chain on that Yamaha 1100? You've never seen a chain on a Yamaha 1100 before because they're normally shaft drive. But this one's been converted over to chain drive for two reasons. One, to save a little bit of power, which is always allegedly used by the shaft, but also to cut out the lift under acceleration, which you tend to get from a shaft. A delightful touring bike, which surprised people when it first hit the tracks in production form, and now here, for not necessarily the first time, but one of the first superbikes to appear based on a Yamaha 1100, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes in its first outing. You can see there that Pretty really is going harder than the other riders. He's getting it over further. It's got a completely different rear end, made by Pitman's in Adelaide, and Greg Pretty declares himself pretty happy with it, along with the twin plug head that's on the bike as well.
Greg Pretty from South Australia on the Yamaha 1100, which is really an unknown quantity as far as we're concerned and as far as you're concerned, Greg.
Yes, it is, Bob. It's a bit of an experiment as far as Pitman's sponsors go. They've decided to connect it up with chain drive and put a couple of bolt-on horsepower things onto it to get a bit more grunt, and it's been a bit of a rush job to get it ready. As a matter of fact, it was only sort of still working on it last Wednesday when we left, so and as yet we've only had about 10 laps practice as well because of the rain, so everything's up in the air at the moment.
And what'd you find from those 10 laps that you have had on the bike?
Well, Gary, my co-rider, Gary Coleman's very happy with the way it handles, and it seems to have the low-down power that we need around, especially around the top part of the circuit where the corners are very tight. So at the moment everything's looking good, but we just haven't had enough time as yet to sort out gearing and jetting.
Well, the Yamaha, of course, is a very proven machine as far as endurance is concerned. There's nothing ever going to go wrong with the engine, is there?
No, that's where we think we've got it all covered. We've used basically a standard engine with a good head, a good set of exhaust pipes, standard carburation to try and keep it fairly simple and economical. So, basically we're hoping to be there at the end just through the standard engine.
And what difference will it make to the Pretty Coleman team if it does, in fact, turn out wet?
Nothing, I hope. It'll depend on the other riders too, of course.
And how do you think the Yamaha will stand up against the prototypes?
Well, there again, just through not being able to get out there and test the bike up against the other ones, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Bike number 8 started off as a standard Honda 1100R of the type that was first to cross the finishing line and greet the checkered flag in the last Castrol 6R, but subsequently which has been relegated to second place. Riding it will be Dennis Neal on the bike at the moment, and the Victorian Mike Cole, so steady and consistent. Going into the pit area now, but they are one of the highly favoured teams for this event, because Cole is a long-distance race specialist. He's consistent, he's quick, he very rarely makes a mistake, although he did have a fall at Sandown last December and did injure himself, but it was more the fault of a bad tyre than of Michael Cole's judgment. And the man he's riding with, Dennis Neal there, who doesn't particularly like the rain, really is a fearsomely quick rider in the dry. And in the last 6-hour Castrol, which was so wet at Amaroo Park, Dennis Neal had to come to grips with the rain there, and he said he feels a lot more assured now with the wet conditions. You can see there some of the Japanese mechanics that are with the team. A very serious race effort by Team Honda.
Well, Dennis Neal and Michael Cole, but Michael, you have an injury. What's wrong?
Well, I broke my scaphoid bone in my wrist at Sandown, the last round of the Swan Series, and I had it taken out of plaster prematurely, and it was mending, but I got back into training a bit too fiercely, and it looks like I've broken it again.
Does that mean that you're in some risk over 800 kilometres?
Well, I practiced yesterday. I've been withholding on practice, trying to save it for the race, but I'll just have to see how it goes. Dennis is pretty capable of of taking over if, need be.
Team Honda has consolidated this year. They put their two number one riders in New South Wales and Victoria on one bike, and it's a beautiful bike, Dennis. How much different is it to last year?
Oh, it's quite substantially different. It's based on the 1100R, which was brought out for the Castrol 6-hour race. And Clyde and John down in Melbourne have done a tremendous job on it, and they've fabricated a big alloy swinging arm, and it's got the latest model vented disc brakes on the front, as most of the cars that are racing are using. And it's a beautiful thing. We haven't had a chance to go fast on it yet because of the weather, but I'm sure it'll be really good.
Speaking of the weather, you're not known as a wet weather runner. How do you feel when you look at the skies at the moment?
I'm over that now. I'm right.
Really?
We're going to stick it up them this time.
It's a case of really soaking yourself up, is it?
Yeah, that's all it is.
Do you feel you are capable of running in the wet?
Yeah, I can go as fast as any of them. It's just, I can't promise that I'm going to stay on board, that's all. But you hope for the best.
Wrestling with the vagaries of a wet track is bike number 11, the Victorian entry, Rob Phillips, riding in the superbike class on a Suzuki 1100. Phillips, who had the misfortune to fall here in his bike to catch fire during the first round of the Swan Series, going very gingerly, as you can see, through the corner of the bottom. The riders rueing the fact that for 3 hours this morning they were looking at a dry track, and almost instantly it started raining. The practice session started officially, and the track as you see it there has been what they've been coping with ever since. Not the sort of conditions to be handling a superbike, as you can see, with the exhaust tucked out of the way in the centre of the bike there, putting out a lot more power than standard, around 130 horsepower, but sending it all through a standard frame. Phillips a very good wet weather rider, in fact. Different view of him down at the bottom corner and coming up to the Bridgestone Bridge on the long 2.62 kilometre circuit at Oran Park, the Grand Prix circuit. Phillips from Albury, Mick Hone from Melbourne. A good team, because Phillips has a lot of wet weather.
Rob Phillips, the last time we saw you here at Oran Park, you lost it at one stage and were out of the race.
Yeah, it was a bit of an accident over in Sutton's Corner. Yeah, it wasn't very good at all.
What do you think about the Suzuki and its chances in the over the 800 kilometres?
Well, Alan Pickering built the bike. Mick Hone owns it. It's a very good, fast bike, well proven. It's been going now for 12 months. And I think it'll finish the race, no worries. We're not going to rev it very hard. We're just going to hang in there and finish, and that's the main thing.
Who do you see as your main competitors?
Well, there's definitely Andrew Johnson. I think Wayne Gardner now is going to be riding with him. So there's Andrew and Wayne and Dennis Neal and Mick Cole. I think that's about our biggest problem. So.
And what about the wet weather? Is that going to affect you if it does turn out wet?
Wet weather sort of... I ride reasonably fast in the wet weather, but I do have a few falls and whatnot too, but I like the wet weather. Mick doesn't mind it, so it should be pretty interesting to see what happens if it does rain with the other riders as well, because they like it too, so we're all still going to have the same battle no matter what, I'd say.
Michael Cork riding number 32, sharing that bike with Scott Stevens, the highly talented young Tasmanian, on a Kawasaki 1100. Stevens, the younger of the two riders, the less experienced, but the faster. But at the moment, Cork treating the bike with great deference, as he should, under these slippery conditions. It's running, as you can see from the white number plate, in the superbike class, the most popular class in the event. There's just 4 prototype bikes entered, more than 20 superbikes, and about 15 production bikes. Michael Cork has always ridden superbikes for Bankstown Honda and Kawasaki Centre, and they've always been Kawasaki's. That's what they're on this time. And with the ability of this young Tasmanian, which is yet really to be seen in meetings that we've covered, the Castrol 2-hour in Victoria and then the Castrol 6-hour at Amaroo last year. But with the ability of Scott Stevens, which is enormous, he really can wring the neck of the biggest and the most powerful motorbikes. He can get every last ounce out of them, despite really very little experience on a motorbike. Teamed with the greater age and experience of Michael Cork, should be a strong running team. Nice clean line there, giving himself margins at the outside of corners, entering that one a little bit tightly. Over the dog leg. Looking relaxed, not a big man. Now BP. Pretty well into the apex and round to the pit area.
At 21, Scott Stevens is probably the youngest of the stars in tomorrow's race. Scott, how do you feel against the more experienced competitors?
I think I'd rather it be in the dry. At the moment, it looks like it's going to be wet.
But you're from Tasmania, it's beautiful.
Yeah, as they said at the 6 hour, it ended up falling off twice.
Yeah. So you're riding a bike that isn't your own. It's out of Bankstown in New South Wales. How has the bike felt so far?
It felt good. We came out on Wednesday and did about 10 laps in the dry and felt really good. It was light and it seems quite responsive.
Faster than the bike you've been riding?
I think they're about the same, actually. I couldn't compare them. You'd have to have them side by side, really.
Scott, have you been told that you're number 2 to Michael Cork on the bike, or is it a case of both of you being equal number 1s?
I don't think Michael and I, we don't really consider it 1 or 2. I think we're both going to just do our best effort, really.
What sort of tactic do you employ in an 800-kilometre race?
Really just to stay upright and just to finish the race, but on the pace.
On a score out of 10, how quick would you be riding? 8 tenths, 9 tenths?
Probably for the first hour or 2 hours you'd be close to 10 tenths, and then probably 8 tenths once you get a position, just to try and keep it.
Are you concerned perhaps that the pace is going to be such tomorrow that people will just try and run away from you?
I think that is going to be the case, because Dennis and Andrew Johnson, all those guys, everyone's got a lot to make out of the race, so everyone's going to be going really hard, and I think we've really decided just to go at our own steady pace and make sure we're there at the end.
Down the main straight goes one of the production entries in this race, number 33, to be ridden by Roger Hayes and Malcolm Campbell. The Coca-Cola 800, being held for the second year, is really 3 races within one, because there are 3 classes: prototype bikes, super bikes, which are production bikes but with quite a degree of modification allowed, and then standard production bikes. And this is one of the Honda CB 1100Rs, which was under the lap record in practices earlier in the week. Hayes has left Team Honda, joined up with Malcolm Campbell, who formerly rode with Bob Levy in his team. Campbell, a Tasmanian, very quick. He used to share a ride with Rodney Cox. He was just a little bit quicker than Cox, and Hayes has got back to some form which he did seem to lose in Honda team. So that this bike, now backed by Gus Lou Motorcycles, looks to be one of certainly the quickest runners in the production class. And as we saw last year, production bikes, despite being slower in outright lap times, can, by the end of the race, through reliability and changing weather conditions, be right up among the more powerful prototype and super bikes. The track drying, but as you can see, still very wet. But the riders, each practice session that's going by, the riders getting just a little bit quicker as they clear the water from the track. And at the moment, the rain is not falling very heavily. It's just started falling again a bit now, but nevertheless, track conditions not as bad as they have been earlier today.
Well, Roger, on the 1100R, a bike that you've had a lot of experience on, and you've been knocking on the door on that lap record this week, even though it's been bad practice.
Yeah, the bike's going extremely well. We knocked just over a second off Dennis Neal's lap record last Sunday, and Malcolm's doing about the same times. So we reckon we've got a good chance of winning it outright.
Even against the prototypes?
Yes, well, we're lapping at the same time as they did last year, the outright bikes. So there should only be 2-3 seconds in it, and we got longer fuel consumption than they have, and reliability's on our side.
But the one thing that is against you if it continues is this diabolical rain.
Yes, well, neither of us like the rain. We practiced yesterday and we're going extremely well, but still, you can come off at any time.
Well, you're a noted long-distance rider. What's going to be your riding time on the bike between the two of you?
We'll probably look at somewhere around an hour 30, because you can't really work out fuel stops, because your fuel stops actually depend on what lap times the leader's doing, because he finishes the race. You might not get to the 306 laps, so you've got to kind of work it out as you go.
the Bridgestone Bridge comes number 35, another of the production bikes, and again the red number plate indicating that it's running in the production class. This a New Zealand pairing of Vince Sharp and Glenn Williams, a Honda CB1100R. The bike and the rider have actually been parted company earlier in the week. Vince Sharp fell off the bike at fairly high speed actually, but was quite unharmed. Got straight to his feet, dusted himself down, and the bike, as you can see, is looking immaculate. Big 1100 Honda, very purpose-built. The most way out and specialised of the production machines by comparison with the GSX 1100 Suzuki. Very much a semi-race bike, but nevertheless complying with production bike regulations, brought out for a number of events, but first seen in Australia at last year's Castrol 6R. Down now to the low, slow part of the circuit, where a bike like this really wants to stretch its legs and really feels very hobbled, particularly when it's wet. And the even slower, twistier section now round the back. That bike really wants to get flying through there, and the rider really has to keep it tame. This stop corner, first gear, and he does have to ease it out there, just feeding the throttle on, because if he throws that throttle open, the bike will be sideways and he'll be off in a flash.
New Zealand's top production riders, Vince Sharp, has been brought to Sydney by Honda to ride in the Coca-Cola 800. Vince, it's a big chance for you, I guess, to be running with a professional Australian team.
Yeah, John, it's real good. We come from New Zealand and we learn so much over here. The races in New Zealand aren't run on this big a scale, and it's a real good challenge to come over here.
How do the top New Zealanders compare to the top Australians? We've seen the like of John Hiscock, of course, as anyone's equal.
Yeah, I think that we're all much of a muchness. The only thing is it takes everybody to adapt to the different tracks. But I think the top New Zealand riders just could compare quite favourably with Australian riders.
Vince, you've had a big drama this week. You dropped the model at about 140 kilometres an hour. What happened?
Yeah, I took the bottom corner down there just before, what do they call it? Rothmans or something, yeah. And I took it just too fast, and it slid right around me. I couldn't hold it.
Do you find the circuit particularly dangerous, especially in the wet?
No, it's a wee bit greasy, but it's quite a good safe circuit, I think. There's a lot of runoff areas.
A difficult circuit to learn for someone like yourself?
Yeah, well, we don't get anything like this in New Zealand. All our tracks are really flat, and but it's not too bad.
What are your tactics for tomorrow?
Well, we haven't had much chance. We've only been practising in the rain, so I don't know how we're going to go, but I think we've got as good as chances anyway.
This is the main opponent to the Honda 1100R in the production class, the GSX 1100 Suzuki. Neville Hiscock, the young brother of David, who's been so successful in Australian production racing in recent times, and who put up himself such a good performance in the 750 class in the last Castrol 6R, sharing the ride with former Honda rider Alan Decker. And it's been a team that's been shuffled around a lot, and that never bodes well, really. Although the two riders are very capable, a little bit different in experience, though Hiscock much less experienced than Alan Decker. And coming up there on 32, the Mick Cork Scott Stevens Kawasaki 1100 that's in the superbike class. Over the dogleg they go and down the hill. This is an interesting comparison between a superbike and a production bike in the wet. There you can see that Hiscock is doing a good job going past Michael Cork down the main straight. A lot of power of the bike, but now look at the extra power of the superbike. But Cork doesn't like it under brakes, knocks it off, and lets the production bike go through again. And this is the sort of toing and froing that we might see tomorrow. We certainly will see, I think, if it's wet. And the one thing you can say about New South Wales weather at the moment is that it's certain to change, and I would say that it's a very good bet that sometime during the race tomorrow the conditions will at least turn from fine to wet, if they're not wet all through.
Stu, when they consolidated their team, Alan Decker's now on a Suzuki GSX 1100. How does the bike feel?
Feels rather good. It's only a production bike. But I rode it out here yesterday. Seemed very good in the wet. It suits wet conditions.
Alan, it must be very disappointing to you to lose the Honda ride.
Oh, in a way it was, yeah.
Because they're a beaut thing to ride, yeah?
They're very nice to ride,
the Superbike.
Yeah, the Superbike's a lot of fun.
What are your plans for this year then? Are you hoping that this Suzuki ride will lead to more?
No, I think I'll hang up my boots after this one.
Why?
Oh, I think I've had a good run at it. It's a good sport, but I've had enough.
It's reasonable to say that you were dropping him a little bit last year.
Well, the 2 times I did fall off were on national TV. That's what sort of made it bad for me. Yeah.
What are you going to do when you give up the sport?
I got some shooting to do and some swimming and some other things I'm going to pick up on.
Well, this is a swan song race. How hard are you going to try?
I think I'm really riding it just to have a good time. Really, I'd like to sit back and watch the race really, but I'll see it even better out there.
With the rain, is it possible that a production bike could win?
Oh yeah, very possible.
And you've got Neville Hiscock, the New Zealander, with you, and that makes a very strong teammate.
Yeah, he is very good. As a matter of fact, he's been beating his brother consistently in New Zealand.
So he hopes for tomorrow?
Well, I hope we win. I mean, of course, I'd like to win. I'd like to get in a good note.
Well, a very interesting final practice session, and one in which we saw some of the unexpected riders coming up into the top 10 contenders on provisional times for tomorrow's race. But Will Hagan, of course, much of that will change once race time gets underway.
Yes, well, I've never seen the weather be so cruel, because it started just as practices started, it finished as official timing finished, and the bikes out practicing now, every one of them, without any doubt, has been quicker than the 10 times that will, well, all the times that will make up the grid positions tomorrow. So what will happen, we don't know, because with 3 classes and then the vagaries of Sydney weather in recent times, the race really to be run over 7 odd hours, anything can happen.
And of course a moving grid position as well tomorrow, of course, also won't be that important, taking pole position in this race. The Coca-Cola 800 starting tomorrow at 10 o'clock here at Oran Park. Let's have a look at those early provisional grid positions. And we can see there that the leading bike was the Ducati of Roebuck and Fuller, and to Yamaha of Pretty and Coleman from the Suzuki of Lonsdale and Harmon, another Suzuki of Cannell and Cannell with the Ducati of Robbins and Byers in 5th position. And in the final 5 positions were Pete and Blanco, along with Mick Lendon, Matt Thompson, Dennis Neal, Mick Cole, Paul Feeney, Vincent and Bill McCullough and Philip Ryan. But as we said, much of that will change before race gets underway tomorrow, with the weather changing, of course, and the bikes out on the track now who are improving their times already. And once the 7 hours or more gets going then tomorrow in the Coca-Cola 800, well, anything could happen. It's a wide open race at this stage with a lot of contenders, and it promises to be a most exciting event. ABC Sports coverage of the event starts at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon after our coverage of the Gold Star and the Sports Sedans from Sandown. Be with the Sen, Bob Vincent reporting from Oran Park. For what has been a caution